Have you ever thought, what is that icon? Or how do I make that? Or even, what should I be doing now? That's this video. First, hydrogen. There's a few products that don't have icons on the handcraft, that is a replicator control panel. Generally, ores aren't there, nor are rare materials. But the first of these that you'll run across and perhaps be confused by is hydrogen. Hydrogen is a side product of refining crude oil. It can also be obtained from gas giants, but you get to that later. The icon for the good is a sphere, which is the proton, inside of a ring with a small sphere on the ring, which represents the electron. Here's where I was stuck for a while. I wanted to make hydrogen because I wanted to make red cubes, but I didn't know how to make hydrogen. Hovering over all of the buildings didn't tell me anything, and this icon isn't on the crafting page. I didn't see any recipes or products that seemed relevant. So how do you make hydrogen? Actually you extract oil, but the tricky thing is the recipe for producing hydrogen is not the hydrogen icon itself. I'm not entirely sure that all recipes that produce two outputs have a recipe icon rather than an output icon, but at least in this case that's true. You get a funny icon for the recipe, but what it actually produces is just hydrogen. Ultimately, hydrogen is just a standard product that you put on a belt. In the category of things that have recipe icons are plasma refining, aka oil refining, X-ray cracking. Why is it called X-ray? We currently use the word cracking on Earth when talking about normal peasant-grade oil refining. I guess future tech uses X-rays, but really cracking is just cracking. Fractionation also has a weird icon, but is basically deuterium production. Mass energy storage, which you'll get to in late game, converts critical photons into antimatter. That is basically power received from your Dyson sphere or swarm into antimatter on a planet. And is the only antimatter production mechanism in the game, and also has an icon that doesn't look like its product. Also, a few other items that have weird icons are the Annihilation Constraint Sphere, which is just a weird looking icon. The Space Warper, which again is a weird icon. The Photon Combiner. And there's also the Rare Materials, which you'll see icons for perhaps at some point or another. Or maybe even at some point pick up some of these rare items from a rare collection mechanism, but not recognize them. Research. Note that it's possible that you might want a product before you've unlocked the tech to make it. The research tree doesn't have all the prerequisites that you would think it has. If you find yourself needing a product but not knowing how to make it, well, like I did with hydrogen, it's possible that you just haven't unlocked that item yet. I think in the early game, graphite, motors, and steel fall into this pool, where the research to unlock those production of those technologies is not a requirement within the UI for research that requires those items. Another weird thing is fluids. Fluids are actually just an item like any other, except they kind of have this attribute fluid, which means they can be put into a fluid container. Otherwise, you put them on a belt. You cart them around. You can put them in a standard storage container, whatever. There's no pipes in this game, just the storage tank. Everything on a belt shows up as a box. If it's been piled, and if you have a piler, you know what piling is, and if you don't know what piling is, you haven't unlocked the tech yet. Anyway, if it's been piled, you'll see two boxes on top of each other, though that's hard to see unless you zoom in. If it's been sprayed with proliferator, you'll see bright dots on the side of those boxes, which might be hard to see unless it's nighttime or you're looking towards the sun instead of away from it. Contrast matters there. So you might not be stuck, but you might be wondering, how and why do I get off the planet? Your first real reason to get off the planet will be to meet the titanium ore needs of red research cubes. Your starter moon, and by the way, now at least with this current patch, it's always a moon if your system's gas giant, won't have titanium or silicon. Yet you can make silicon from stone and feed some early game silicon needs that way, so probably your first reason to leave will be to go find titanium. Later you'll head off planet again for silicon or for hydrogen from your gas giant. Eventually other planets will provide more iron than your initial planet, more iron, copper, coal, and other basic resources, as well as land area to convert into factory. So, why go to a different star system? Well, there's no necessary reason in the game to do so. One reason to leave would be to build a bigger factory, or to chase an achievement, explore, find rare resources, or to futz around. Note that there's basically 3 goals or 3 possible endpoints in this game. First is to build the most powerful Dyson sphere you can and compete on the leaderboard. Second is to complete the game as fast as possible, and there's an achievement for that. Or third is just to fuss around and build factories because it's fun. Fuels. Fuels were one of the confusing things for me. Specifically, I was wondering whether I should be using a different energy production plant or be using a different type of fuel or whatnot. There are 18 different fuel types and there are 6 power producers. And here you'll see screenshots and mouse overs of each one of them. A couple of sections on power. First, let's quickly look at the fuels. There are 18 burnable items, and there's an achievement for burning 16 of those in your mech. Almost all of those that are burnable are also burnable in a thermal power plant, but not precisely. Some of them make more sense to burn in a power plant than others, but this video isn't about comparing fuel. This is just a quick reference. Here they are. Plants, or plant fuel, logs, organic crystals, and coal. All of those are natural resources. Graphite and diamond, both of those are produced. Crude oil and refined oil. Graphene and carbon nanotubes, both of which require both oil as well as carbon. Hydrogen, deuterium, and antimatter, all 3 of which have physics particle type icons. Then comes their fuel rods. The hydrogen fuel rod, the deuterium fuel rod, and the antimatter fuel rod. Next is fire ice, and then accumulators. Really, you can burn accumulators. And you can burn nearly anything in your mech. Not all of those, however, will go into a thermal power plant. But anyway, that's a different question. Instead, let's look at how you should power your base. The answer is meh, however you want. If you're watching this guide, it doesn't matter. You kind of got to get through the game a few times before you understand how everything fits together. And the best way to learn that is to just do what you feel like. There's not really any horribly bad decisions in this game. If you want to hunt down the most renewable power source, then just use wind, solar, and hydrogen. And that's not hydrogen fuel cells, but straight hydrogen. Let's say you want to play the game without being too obtuse, like you don't really want to burn bad materials. Well, okay. Well, in that vein, there's only 6 ways of producing power. Wind turbines, solar cells, thermal power plants, nuclear power plants, the artificial sun, and then ray receivers. Accumulators are a way of powering a planet, but they don't generate energy themselves, so I'm not including that here. That just allows you to ship energy from one planet to another. If you need more power, the easiest thing to do is carpet your planet with low-tier power sources, or, alternatively, build the infrastructure to support higher-tier power. So there's a question of whether you should burn one material or another. First, if it's logs and plants, the answer is no. Spending time collecting that stuff isn't worth it, except for the very, very early game. What about diamonds or graphene? Take a look at the energy produced per item and compare that to the ingredients. There's no reason to go up the chain further than graphite. It might take coal to graphite, and that's a good investment in energy, but taking graphite to diamond actually loses energy for you. Once you get to graphite, burn that, and then wait until you get to hydrogen. Hydrogen is really trash. It's an infinite supply good. If you put collectors on your gas giant, it will forever generate hydrogen and never run out, and there's no reason to do anything other than burn hydrogen and more hydrogen. Depending on your resource settings, you might want to burn some titanium to make hydrogen fuel cells, which slightly increases the energy that you get out of hydrogen a little bit. But the bonus that you get from hydrogen fuel cells over hydrogen is fairly small, so it's kind of a value judgment. Use fuel cells in your mech, definitely. That is worth the investment, not just because of the slight increase in energy, but the dramatic increase that comes from the fuel chamber bonus. Your next power source after hydrogen should be deuterium fuel rods, which aren't thermal, hence you need a different power plant, which is the mini thermonuclear plant, or whatever it's called. Finally, you'll have antimatter and artificial stars. That's it. Well, other than the ray receivers. So once you get to the point of building out a Dyson sphere, then your ray receivers are at that point free energy. Note that you do have to build some infrastructure in order to get anything out of the ray receiver, but from then on, a ray receiver, just like a solar cell, is free energy, perfectly renewable. What does the plus 50% fuel chamber power generation line mean? If you hover over different fuel sources, you might see this line, and it might be 50% or 100% or 500%. That means in your mech and only in your mech. Thermal power plants are not fuel chambers. The only fuel chamber in your game is your mech itself. Thermal power plants actually have a minus 20% power generation debuff. So not only do they ignore this fuel chamber power generation buff, they have a debuff on top of that. The fuel chamber bonus basically establishes a different set of priorities for what you burn in your mech versus what you burn on your planets, or what you use to power your planets. If you've got limited DFRs, burn those in your mech rather than on the planet. Keep in mind that gas giants and crude oil are infinite, as is solar and wind power. Infinite doesn't mean high throughput, but whatever throughput is there will last forever. You can collect hydrogen from your gas giant, turn it into full accumulators, and then ship those across the universe. Anything else requires some small consumption of fixed resources. So why doesn't burning a hydrogen fuel cell produce an empty fuel cell? The game doesn't. That would be nice. You'd conserve some energy, or well, some materials, but again, game doesn't do that. Speaking of winning the game, if you're wondering how do you win the game, well, you do that by completing the mission completed research task, which takes 4,000 white cubes, each of which requires one of the 5 base cubes plus 1 unit of antimatter. And the only way of making antimatter is through critical photons obtained from a ray receiver after having at least some part of a Dyson sphere launched. So in other words, to make white cubes, that is 4,000 white cubes without solar cells, is just, it's painful and expensive and slow, but it is possible, and it gets an achievement, and achievements are what life is all about and why we exist on this planet. Did anything else in the game utterly confuse you at first? Let me know in the comments.